I'm Marla with 9 Health, and this is our weekly show, Health Happens. Today we're really lucky to be joined by Jason Youngblood from Cigna. He's a licensed professional counselor. And why are we at the chocolate lab here on Colfax, surrounded by all this wonderful chocolate? Well, it's Valentine's Day coming up on Friday, and a lot of times we think about partnership and being, in love and with somebody, but many of us are not. Mm-hmm. And so that could be a setup for loneliness. And so that's what we're talking about today with you. You're going to help us understand, is loneliness or can it be hurting our health, and how widespread is it?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
And what a perfect setting to have any discussion, quite frankly. But
any excuse to come to the chocolate lab, we'll just do that.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
But let's dive into it, because you at Cigna have done a study, and you found some interesting factoids that we're going to share today, and really find out how big of a problem this is. And one of the things that I thought is, we feel lonely. I sometimes feel lonely. I think everybody does. But how do we know what loneliness is defined? How do you define it in a clinical setting?
That's a really great question. And before we dive into specific loneliness, let's just talk about feelings. And feelings are normal. And when we're little, we learn about feelings like happiness is associated with a smile, sadness with a frown. But loneliness is a feeling. And feelings have jobs. They tell us how we're feeling inside, and sometimes they make us do things a little differently. So when you think about loneliness as a feeling, it's a normal, healthy, adaptive feeling that might make us seek other people out, do something a little different. So
it's not abnormal, it's not bad.
No, it is not. So loneliness is a productive emotion, and we should pay attention to it and be mindful of what it's telling us. However, just like any feeling, like sadness that goes on a little too long, it can become a problem. And that's really what we measured in our study, is loneliness that goes kind of beyond that normal feeling of loneliness that you may experience a few times a week or a few times a month. And so loneliness really, the way that we're talking about it, is really defined by an inability to connect with other people, just feeling that you're lacking that connection to someone, perhaps that you don't have someone to talk to, you don't have a best friend to turn to, and it bothers you. It leaves you feeling negative. And that's really, I think, what is characterized loneliness is it's a feeling that, and it persists, and it's not okay with you.
Yeah, so it's bothering you, it's kind of interrupting your life, you don't feel good about it. And then you said something interesting, it persists. How long should we notice it before we think, oh boy, this is a problem?
So we all have moods, and those moods can kind of come and go. And so sometimes it's normal to feel lonely for a day or so, or even just a few days. If it really persists and it's significant beyond a few days, it might be something to start paying attention to a little bit more and thinking about maybe reaching out or talking to someone about it. But if it really goes on for more than, I would say, 30 days, maybe that's whenever you want to think about talking to a professional or finding that friend to talk to.
More than 30 days, and you should probably do something different.
And the same goes for sadness or
good
as well.
Good to know. Okay, so we're all going to be lonely from time to time. I think that's important to notice, because just because you're lonely doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Right. And sometimes being alone is an awesome thing, and it's important. Sometimes when I'm alone, I've got a wife and 2 kids and 2 dogs, and sometimes
we want alone time,
and sometimes when I leave for work and I shut the car door, that's a really great feeling, and it's normal and healthy and restorative.
And that's okay too.
But if you're alone and that's not okay with you, that's when loneliness can come in.
So good tips, right? So that we know what our triggers are. Okay, now tell us a little bit more about the study. How did you measure this? I mean, it sounds like a very challenging thing to measure loneliness. So
we did measure loneliness, and we used the UCLA Loneliness Scale or Index, and it is a well-regarded study to be able to measure and quantify loneliness. It's a scale. It's been designed, of course, at UCLA, and it's based on 20 questions that you can take, and then you get scores ranging from 20, I think, up to 80. And so they've defined kind of loneliness, that negative loneliness, as any score above a 43. And so for our study that we did in 2019, we looked at 10,000 people, adults.
That's a lot of people. So I just want to remind people, if you're watching this, that we put this loneliness loneliness scale, thanks to you guys at Cigna, on our website. It's a blog. And so you can go to 9healthfair.org and take this index. And if you have questions for us, we have a licensed professional counselor here. If you have questions for us, does this apply to me? Am I lonely? How do I know what to do next? You can go ahead and type those in, and we'll try and get those questions answered for you if we can. And if we can't answer them right now, we'll research them for you. So go ahead and ask us your questions, and please continue. Tell us a little bit more about that study. I just wanted to remind people that you too could, take that loneliness.
Yes, 20 questions. It'll be real quick.
Super easy. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I think people ask how big of a problem is loneliness. And so when we conducted the first study in 2018, we have noticed some shifts and changes, which I think we can talk about. But loneliness, we looked at people who scored at 43 or higher, so people who were determined to be lonely, and we looked at their health outcomes. And what we found is that people who score 43 or higher have the same health outcomes as people who smoke 15 cigarettes every day.
Wow.
So there are some negative health consequences associated with being lonely.
That's incredible. I mean, you wouldn't think that would affect you that way.
Yes.
As much as smoking does.
Yep.
So that's incredible. And so if we're thinking about we want to be healthy, this is one of the things we might want to consider.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Consider who is around you, your social connections. And not only that, but I think maybe I'll come back to this point over and over again as I talk with you, is that if you're raising children or you have small children in your life, consider them as well and their social connections and the importance of helping them to understand their health includes who's around them and who they're connected to as well.
I think it's a new paradigm, new inclusive paradigm about health. We think it's your blood pressure and your weight and all of that and smoking, and that matters.
Yes.
But it doesn't. We don't often think of this loneliness and our social connection, and that matters too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So and it affects different groups of people. This was surprising to me a little bit differently. So tell us about that piece.
Yeah. So this is, I think, perhaps the most interesting part to me. So let's break it down by 3 different groups of people. Let's first talk about men versus women. And
yes,
let's talk about that. It's almost Valentine's Day, and men are from Mars or something like that. I don't know. Women are from Venus.
Venus, yes.
That was a few years ago. And so men and women actually are about the same level of lonely, but there is a little bit of a difference. So in this newest loneliness index, men scored higher. So men are slightly more lonely than women. They scored an average of 63 points, where women scored an average of 58 points. But the thing that was really interesting when I looked at that, when we looked at the first study that was done in 2018 and the one that we did last year, men's loneliness score jumped 10 points over the course of a year. So I'm not sure what that's about, but so men are slightly more lonely than women. Maybe they're less likely to reach out or be connected.
Yeah, I guess it's stereotypical to me. It doesn't really surprise me. I don't know if it surprises you guys, but women tend to be more communicative and have girlfriends and make that a point.
Yes, I know my wife in my house, that's one of the things that she does. She handles the family social connections more so than I do. So I think that definitely is something to that.
It doesn't have to be that way, but it
doesn't have
feels
to
like
be that
it
way.
is a little bit stereotypical that way. So men more than women.
Men more than women. And now let's talk about generations. And I think, the last few years we're focusing a lot about baby boomers versus millennials, and we've heard so much about that. But how do they compare?
Boomer.
Okay, boomer. I hate that expression.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's all good. But so actually boomers are the least lonely generation.
Yeah,
the least lonely on the scale. And so that also is correlated with happiness, measures of happiness and life satisfaction that people have done longitudinally. As you get to be your 50s, 60s, and 70s, you tend to get happier. So you figure things out the older you get.
Look forward to, right?
Yes, it gets better. It does get better, apparently, according to the research. But you figure out about how to make important social connections and how to manage emotions and what matters in life. So at least that we have that to look forward to.
And I find as I get older, I have better quality friends. Do you know, like I choose wisely. Like it's not just anybody to do anything with it at any time. It's like, the time is limited and I want to spend time with people that I really like. So.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know of any studies that support that, but I think it makes so much sense. So I'm in Gen Z, which is 38 to 51-year-olds, and I would say when I hit about the 40-year mark, I reevaluated and decided I'm only going to spend the time doing the things I really want with people that I like. And I think that's common around that age group. Gen Zers are the next least lonely group. Only 65% of them reported being lonely.
It's almost the younger you are in this study, the more chance you have to be lonely.
That's correct, yeah. But if you think about the two groups that we've talked about, the boomers and Gen Xers, yes. They're dealing with raising teenagers, launching their children, and maybe taking care of elderly parents. So there's a lot going on there. Millennials, we talk about millennials so often, right? I don't know if there's a generation that has been talked about as much, but they were the next most lonely. 71%. 71% of millennials reported feeling lonely. And then Gen Zers, the 18 to 22-year-old, most lonely, with nearly 80% reporting that they feel lonely.
Do you agree with that? I don't know if people would notice that in their own lives. And if you think that's accurate, let us know. Or, no, that can't be true. Well, study shows it. It is. Everyone's experience is a little different.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So good.
And let's talk about, what people love to talk about. When we did the first study, and I was going all over the place and talking about this, people said to me, it's social media use. It's social media use.
Well,
and we didn't have the research or the data, but we did look at social media use in this latest study, and the results were interesting. And so we looked at people who self-report being heavy social media users, and they were significantly more lonely than people who were moderate to mild social media users.
Proves what we all thought, right?
Yes. Well, I think it just proves what we all know and what our grandparents would have told us is that your phone or your computer doesn't replace the human connection that we have sitting surrounded by chocolate today. That is, your phone isn't a replacement. Chocolate helps, yes.
It's the human connection.
But 73% of heavy social media users report feeling lonely versus 52% of moderate. And I think that's, it's intuition, but important to know. And if you're raising kids or raising yourself, just think about how you feel when you use social media. Be mindful about that. If you're sitting on the couch and you're surrounded with your family, but everyone is looking at their phones, that happens in my living room more often than not. How do you feel? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel hollow or empty from that?
It's a good question. I think we get used to it, and it's just the way it is, right? And then we don't notice that we're not feeling connected. We're not, where everyone's in their own little world, the bubble.
Absolutely.
Whatever they're looking at.
And I love in my house, I have a 10-year-old, and we all take turns calling each other out on social media use, but my 10-year-old is like the best rule keeper with no phones at the dining room table. And so
that's give
your kids a job. No phones at the dining room table, and sometimes if we're playing games or even just hanging out together in a shared space, somebody will notice like, hey, everyone is looking at their phone. So.
Including you, right?
And so the next time you're out to eat, if you come to a place like this to eat, take a look at people eating together too.
I know.
Not uncommon for people to be sitting looking at their phones versus each other.
I've seen that happen. So, good tips about what maybe we can do a little bit differently to encourage connection, just in our own home. But one of the things that was interesting to me is even though you're around people, like at the workplace, you can still be feeling lonely. It seems incongruent to me.
Yes.
But your study finds some interesting results. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so loneliness in the workplace, that is a big focus of Cigna. And, when we looked, if you are in the workplace, you might be surrounded with people constantly.
And you have to talk to them probably and work with them.
You're forced to. You have to have meetings with them and engage with them. But if you don't feel connected, or if that connection isn't meaningful to you in a social manner, then you could feel lonely. And so you could be surrounded by a room full of people at work or at home. Families, it doesn't matter. Like, you could be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. It's about the quality of that connection and what it means to you.
I think that's such an interesting point. So you could be surrounded by people even in your own family family
Yeah.
and still feel lonely.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
We wouldn't think that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when you think about work, so my wife is a teacher and she has 130 students. She teaches middle school. So in a given day, she's
God
never
bless her,
alone.
by the way, yeah.
Yes, yes. She's never alone in a given day, but she interacts with adults only a handful of times throughout the day. But think about other workplace settings, from office settings to healthcare settings, where people may not actually have a chance to connect. So loneliness in the workplace is really important. So there's a few factors regarding loneliness in the workplace and some things to consider. So one is work-life balance. So I don't know how you feel about your own work-life balance.
I don't want to talk about it.
You don't want to talk about it? You don't have to talk about it. That's okay.
Just kidding. I think sometimes it gets out of whack.
It does.
It really does.
It
You
does.
find yourself at home working on your computer at 10 o'clock at night. And,
Yes.
Getting to the office early and
Returning emails when you get into bed, or first thing you get that phone and return emails when you wake up, open your eyes, and it can get out of balance. But so the study looked at work-life balance, and so I'm going to take us back to our childhoods. Remember Goldilocks?
I do.
All right. So she broke and entered into the bear's house, and then she tried their porridge and their chairs and their beds. And let's take the chairs or the porridge. One was too hot,
Right.
and one was too cold, and one was just right.
Yes.
The study showed that people who report their work-life balance being just right are least lonely and more happy. So people who report not working enough, not engaged enough, or over-engaged in work-life balance, maybe too much work, are feeling more lonely than people who report more.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But I guess my question would be, how do we do that? What do we? Because work seems so demanding, and if you don't get it done, then it's just worse the next day when you go to work. Then you feel even worse because the work is piling up.
Well, right. So it piles up, and how do you feel when it piles up? You start feeling like you're losing control, right? And so when you lose control, you start to get a little panicky. And what helps you feel less panicky is being connected to other people.
Getting the work done.
Telling people about how you're feeling, maybe getting some feedback from friends and some
that's a good
support.
Yeah.
And so it's a catch, whatever that's
22, I think is what
and
they
that,
call it, yeah.
and that sometimes the more out of whack we get, the more we need that social connection.
Sure.
So if you're feeling that, maybe that's a red flag to be like, hey, I need to stop and connect. It's really valuable maybe to take 5 minutes out and just call someone up and laugh with them. Tell them how you're feeling. It really brings up the concept of having a best friend at work. And everybody really should strive to have a best friend at work. It doesn't mean that that's your best friend in the same sense of outside of work,
Right.
but who could you say anything to and not risk it getting back to your boss, right? Who is that person you trust? And so if you don't have one of those right now, it's fine, but just think about that, because having a best friend at work does make a difference. And I think that loneliness in the workplace is, as far as the outcomes of people who are more lonely,
Right.
the study showed that they're absent more often. They're less
So if you feel lonely and you're not connected at work, you're gonna.
not be there more often,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay.
So you're going to be absent more
That's
often.
a high cost to workplaces. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're absent, but while you're there, you're going to be less productive
Oh,
than if you're feeling less lonely. The quality of your work is going to be a little bit lower, and you're going to think about leaving. So the turnover rate is higher for people who are feeling lonely. So it really is worthwhile for organizations to consider social connectedness within the workplace, because it really
right.
makes a difference.
It makes a difference, and I think a lot of times we say just get to the work and get work done.
Yes.
And you're saying that actually, if
Don't.
you
Yes.
engage employees and
Yep.
more social activities,
Yeah. Well, and if
your
you
productivity might go up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so think about the factors I just mentioned. So absenteeism, quality of your work, and errors, right? And turnover. There are workplace settings where those things can be very detrimental. Think about healthcare settings. You want your nurse or your doctor to be focused and engaged at work, right?
Sure,
And so it really
absolutely.
makes a difference to pay attention to that. So social connectedness is really important. And I mentioned having kids and raising kids and being aware of who their connections are.
Right.
As a manager, I manage about 22 people. Pay attention to that. Listen when you're talking to your team members. Who are they connected to? Who's their support? Not that you have to dictate that, but just listen to make sure that they are connected.
And maybe have some, I think we used to do this a lot more, lunch together. I mean,
Yeah.
I think more and more I see people just working at their desk eating their lunch.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Don't do that. Managers don't encourage that. So the desk is the dirtiest place. They actually say that, sorry, this is off topic. But
It's okay, this is good.
bathrooms are cleaner than people's desks and computers, so don't eat at your desk. Don't eat there.
That's gross.
That's gross. So go to the lunchroom, go out with people, go for a walk. And as a manager, I never encourage people to sit at their desk. Take your lunch.
So that's
be
the
out.
tip for the day, right? Don't eat your lunch at your desk
Yeah.
today.
Or get a wipe and
Yeah, Clorox might be
yeah, it's
better.
Clorox wipe. Sorry.
Okay, so that's one tip, but what else can people do?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
if we're noticing
yeah.
some of these things that you mentioned, which is, I don't feel very connected at work, or maybe I'm
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
feeling lonely at home, and it's going on for quite some time. What do we do?
Yeah.
What can we do individually?
Well, and think about work has changed, right? We're so connected via technology now.
oh, yeah, it's
and
easier to send an email than to get up and
or
go talk.
instant message.
Yes.
But a lot of people went and now work at home. A lot of our viewers may be working at home. My team is a virtual team, and we're behavioral clinicians who are programmed for social connection. And what happens when they're all working alone? They never see each other. And so that factor is really important to pay attention to. So as a manager, I've done a few things. We have social meetings over the telephone. We have technology. Turn on your cameras if you have a remote staff, but bring people into meeting spaces. And people talk about the importance of meetings needing to be, very focused. But you know what? Social time is important. When I used to work in an office, like the first 20 minutes of the day typically was catching up or getting connected.
Water cooler talk.
Water cooler talk is really vital and important and should be viewed as important. People will be more productive throughout the day if they get their water cooler fix.
Okay, good tip.
But outside of the workplace, just in general, turn off social media. Or know when to turn it off.
Not yet. Don't
not
turn
yet.
it off
No,
yet.
not yet. But know when to turn it off.
Yes.
Know when it
Have limits.
doesn't feel good. That, use it for what it's for. Social media is wonderful to get information and connect with people, but know when it's time to turn it off. Know when it's time to have some chocolate and connect. I think is really important. And teach your kids about that feeling too, and to know when to connect as well.
Maybe the biggest tip I've taken is to be aware if you are feeling lonely. I think maybe sometimes we just don't even know we're lonely.
Yes.
Because we're busy, we're around people.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like we should be lonely or that would be a thing.
Yep.
But what you're saying is, even though you're around people, you're at work, and you're busy, and you're productive, you
Yep.
may be experiencing loneliness.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's a tip I take.
Yeah.
And to find out, right, you can do this loneliness index. It's on 9healthfair.org if you want to take it. It's a study by Cigna. And the other takeaway I have is that between 2018 and 2019, loneliness has gotten to be a much worse problem.
Correct.
So the trajectory is only going to go that way unless we do something about it.
Yes. Stop and pay attention.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
good tips today from you
Yeah.
of what we can do, and maybe we can think of more as we eat chocolate later.
Yes.
After we get
As
off.
quickly as possible, I think.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for giving us all this information.
Yeah,
For doing
thank
this
you.
important study.
Yes, thank you.
I'm surprised to learn also about how important it is for our health every
Yes.
day. So, and that's what we talk about every day because we know health is happening every moment. So, thanks for joining us today. Please feel free to type in your questions. We will still monitor the feed and answer the questions. And join us next week. We have other important topics coming up. So, thank you, and we'll see you next time.